Welcome back to our program. Today we have Scott Gagel with us. He's a physician's associate from Kentucky in the United States and has been working in the field of Ibogaine for many years. He had previously been working in the medical industry until his own personal story brought him to the plant medicine path. So Scott, welcome. And tell us a little more about your story before plant medicines and the circumstances that brought you to seeking an alternative path for you.
Well, it's interesting. I initially, in my probably early 20s, had a very Eastern alternative philosophy about life and about healing. And I always envisioned myself going into some kind of alternative type healing. However, as you know, when you tell life your plans, it tends to laugh at you. So it didn't work out that way. I wound up going into traditional medicine after medical training at the University of Kentucky. I spent 10 years in the emergency room and immediate care centers. Then I went into orthopedic surgery, and I was on staff at the VA Medical Center in Louisville, Kentucky, and was 10 years into that when in 2015 I got a throat cancer diagnosis, which really threw me for a loop, as you can imagine. I mean, most people either have heard about somebody being diagnosed with cancer or have had it themselves. And if you haven't had that diagnosis thrown at you, it's hard to comprehend the weight of that. It really is suffocating to your spirit. And I'm a firm believer that getting that diagnosis really just takes the life out of you. So I think the diagnosis perhaps people succumb to the diagnosis more so than the disease. It's that powerful. So I experienced the weight of that diagnosis, and I know how heavy that is. And I experienced a lot of cancer in my family. My mother died when I was 18 of breast cancer. She was diagnosed at 26 and died at 36. So during my teens, I was watching her struggle with cancer. And then her sister was also diagnosed at 26 with breast cancer and died at 30. So both her and her sister died in their 30s from breast cancer. So I was very accustomed to what cancer can do and the repercussions from it. So when I got it myself, again, it really makes you step back and take stock of your life, which I did. I left medicine temporarily. It wound up being permanent, but I meant it to be a temporary reprise from medicine. But then I realized I really needed to change my whole life. So I left medicine completely in 2016 after I did one traditional treatment, which was radiation therapy it was the base of the tongue, my cancer. So that type of radiation is very amenable to radiation therapy. So I did do radiation therapy. But besides that, I did nothing traditional. Almost everything I did was plant medicine based or some kind of alternative healing. I made my own THC oil. I did a lot of low dose naltrexone, frankincense. There's a lot of things I did that were alternative, that I developed my own protocol around this. And I did very well as far as the physical healing. But the deeper spiritual work was going to take some time, and I knew that. So I happened to get an opportunity to move to Dublin, Ireland, right after my diagnosis. So I got to spend 2 years in Ireland. And my wife at the time, she worked full time. She made enough money that I didn't need to work. So I was able to spend that whole two years in Ireland concentrating on my healing, my soul searching, figuring out why in the world did I get cancer? What was I going to do when I got back to the US? Where did I fit into the healing model now? So part of that 2-year process was discovering psychedelics. I read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, about that time, and it really changed everything. And I think people who have read that book would agree that it's a great introduction to these medicines, and it really destigmatizes everything. So I did a deep dive into studying psychedelic magic mushrooms, taking them, and I really resonated with this type of healing. So by the end of the 2 years, I had made a commitment in my heart that I was going to work with these medicines for the rest of my career. I had no idea what that path looked like, but I knew that was a decision that I had made, and I was going to stick with it. So when I got back to the US, as people know, psychedelics are federally illegal still. So I couldn't just start prescribing LSD or ayahuasca. but you could use ketamine for healing. So ketamine was emerging as a great tool for depression and PTSD. And ketamine's legal. It's been used for over 50 years in traditional medicine. However, for about 20 years now, they've discovered it does amazing things to the brain for healing. So I was reading a lot about treating depression with ketamine. So I started treating clients with ketamine, IV ketamine, and it was very transformative. I mean, both for me, I did it personally, as well as the people I gave it to. So that was kind of dipping my toe into the psychedelic world. But I was also casting a wide net in the psychedelic field, touching base with people that I would meet, or if I would read their book and it resonated with me, I would reach out with a text or a call. So I was just putting out feelers on where I could land to do this type of work. And it just so happens I met a physician in Mexico working with Ibogaine, and he invited me to come stay and see what he did. And it was truly a remarkable, game-changing weekend for me. I realized that Ibogaine is one of the most powerful substances on earth. And I saw a couple of people that were deeply wounded get healed over that time. And I actually sent one of my best friends down to Mexico to do Ibogaine about this time for addiction. And while he was at this clinic in Mexico, I developed a friendship with the CEO. I would call down to check on my friend, and him and I got to talking, and he liked my story. He knew I had a medical background and was interested in psychedelics. So he invited me to come be clinical operations director for this clinic in Mexico. So that was my opportunity I needed to get started in this field. So I moved to Mexico in 2023. I got a divorce, moved to a new country, started a whole new area of medicine. So I really did a 180 in my life. And I've been down here ever since, working with Ibogaine and consulting with patients who are interested in using psychedelics but have nowhere, or they have no idea how to navigate all of those decisions. So I've written a book about that, just an overview of each medicine, the most popular medicines, and just the basics, what it is, what it's used for, the caveats. So it's a real good primer if you're interested and know nothing about this field, and we can talk about the book later. But so that's my story. I started out in traditional medicine. I realized, and funny enough, when I think about it, I had cancer of the throat. If you know anything about healing, that's the center of your voice, literally and figuratively. So when I was doing my soul searching, it made sense. I got cancer in my throat because I was not speaking my truth.
Right.
So ever since I left the country, I've been speaking truth, and it's been a transformative journey for me personally. And it would take hours to talk about the transformational healing I've seen in others since I've been doing this. But so that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Yes. Well, it is. Every time I hear it, we've had the pleasure of working together. I was doing the clinical residency as well with Ibogaine, and so I got to meet Scott. And when I first heard his story, it grabs you. It's always riveting to hear how powerful it is to be given a diagnosis and then to really do this deep dive into a soul search experience to then bring about that transformation and healing. And so thank you for being here and sharing that with us. It's a super courageous journey that you continue to be on.
See, it's a long standing, well, it's a never ending journey. This is a lifelong journey. But I personally believe that most disease, and especially cancer, is an alarm bell from the universe. Something is off. And it's your job to step back and really do an analysis and figure out what. And for most people that I've talked to, their cancer diagnosis, or just a diagnosis in general of a major disease, was truly a gift. It was a turning point for them. And I consider my cancer diagnosis, in retrospect, the greatest gift I've ever received. Because had I not received that, I probably would have continued on that same traditional Western pathway and would have been very unhappy and disengaged and just unhealthy. So, yeah, disease can be a calling, again, to just shift your paradigms and make some shifts all around your life, not just physical, but spiritual and otherwise.
And it's this idea that things happen for you rather than to you, right? Plants really help us kind of
Well,
connect.
at the time, it certainly feels like it's happening to you acutely, but in retrospect, that's when you appreciate that it's happening for you. But it does
Exactly.
take time in retrospect to appreciate that.
Absolutely. So as we're talking about, Ibogaine, Iboga, people still are kind of curious, what is it? There's a big buzz in the United States, especially with the new executive order going around, and certain states really taking it quite seriously to want to develop some programs around it. For those of us that have worked in it, I want you to really kind of tell us the difference between the two. What really is it? And then you can kind of tease it down further.
Well, at the most basic level, Iboga, Iboga, is a plant. So this is a plant native to Central Africa, and the root contains the active alkaloids that are healing. So one of those main alkaloids is ibogaine. So iboga is the plant, ibogaine is the active alkaloid in the root. So the traditional Bwiti use in Central Africa has been to dig up the root, dry it out, chop it up, and they actually physically eat the root bark. And they have a ceremony around this. It's a very it's a coming of age type ceremony for young people. Almost everybody in this area does this at a certain age, and they use it for spiritual transformation, to visit dead ancestors, for guidance going into adulthood. So they've been using it for eons over there. We've just discovered this active alkaloid in the 60s. So there was a heroin addict in 1962, I believe, in New York City. Someone gave him some Ibogaine and said, "You're into psychedelics, you might like this." And so he did Ibogaine, thought nothing of it. 3 days later, he found himself walking the streets of New York, not having done heroin and not having any desire to do any heroin. So he realized this has got some powerful addictive, anti-addictive behaviors. So he spent his entire life trying to get the world to embrace Ibogaine, especially the US, to treat addiction. Ultimately, he was unsuccessful because it's still federally illegal, but he did do a lot of groundwork for what we do know now in the West for treating addiction. So again, at the basic level, Iboga is the plant native to Africa. Ibogaine is the active substance in the root. And most people that come to do Ibogaine in a clinic, that's what they're going to do is the extract. So we extract Ibogaine from the root. It's a purified powder. We usually put it in capsules, and you take capsules. That's how you administer the medicine in the West, typically.
Perfect. That clears things up. And then I know it's traditionally different than other psychedelics, plant medicines, entheogens. What is the difference? How does it operate differently than a traditional psychedelic?
We may need another 2-hour interview for that one. It's quite different from most. And most people who are in this field call Ibogaine the Mount Everest of psychedelics for good reason. It's the pinnacle of plant-based healing, in my opinion. Now, not to discount the therapeutic value of other psychedelics, but Ibogaine truly is unique, not just in how it affects the brain, the spirit, in every way. So again, it would take a long time to get that minutia, and we can maybe do that later episode, just talking about how Ibogaine is different. But Ibogaine is a lot of work. I mean, there's not a lot of euphoria. People do not abuse this medicine. I mean, with ketamine, when I was doing ketamine therapeutically, a lot of people can get a hold of ketamine in the black market, and it's very euphoric, and it can be addictive in and of itself. So that's kind of a caveat with ketamine. If you have an addictive personality, that's a true caveat, is a good word. Just be cautious when you're doing ketamine for depression if you have an addictive personality, because it can lead to tolerance and addiction. Ibogaine is not addictive in any stretch of the imagination. So when you do this medicine, it is a day or two of hard work. This medicine will show you nooks and crannies of your psyche that you may have forgotten about, that you don't want to address, but it's what you need to address. So you do a lot of deep work, and afterwards it's so cathartic. It's very visual when you're actually in the throes of the journey, but afterwards, so there's a couple phases to it. The active phase, the visual phase, is when you have the psychedelic journey. So you can maybe see, a lot of people talk about having conversations with deceased relatives. And it's not like it's a movie. It's like they are there visiting you. And that's what the Bwiti of Africa use it for. So I've heard that over and over, people having conversations, deep, meaningful conversations with deceased loved ones. So that active phase is it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much information coming at you. It can be a little overwhelming for your senses. So that's like a 8-hour phase, that active visual phase. And then afterwards, when the actual tripping is over, you have probably a full day of just introspection where these things start making sense. And you're like, oh, that's what that meant. Or some introspection is a good word. So you do a lot of introspection. You don't sleep that night because your mind's just racing. So that's the informative or introspection phase. And then after that, it's kind of the integration part. So bringing everything together. And that's a long process. I mean, usually when you go to a retreat, there's only a couple of days spent on that integration, but that's when the real work begins. So wherever you go to do this medicine, should you choose to do so, you need to make sure they have a really well put together integration program, because the work has to continue once you get home. Because if you don't integrate these changes into your life, then it's just going to be a psychedelic weekend or a psychedelic week. There's not going to be meaningful change in your life. So there is a lot of work that goes into it. So there's also some cardiac considerations. This medicine cannot be done without medical supervision. Now, a lot of people are doing that, but it really, for safety's sake, should not be done without a medical supervisor, a physician, some kind of clinician to oversee your care. Because if you already have a pre-existing arrhythmia, heart condition, it could be fatal. So there's a lot of screening that needs to go on, EKGs, blood work. But as long as you're clear on those screening processes, the risk is low, but it's not non-existent. So people with any kind of cardiac history need to be very cautious. So that's another thing that makes it a little bit different than most psychedelics, is the potential adverse side effects if you have any kind of cardiac history. So it's very long, it's a lot of work, but I think it's the most spiritually deep medicine out there. So if you want a true transformation, again, I think it is the Mount Everest of psychedelics. So that's kind of an overview of how it's different. Again, we can talk a little bit more later about specifics, but it's amazing stuff. And again, I've seen so many transformations I can't begin to tell you, especially people with addiction. So I've been around a lot of North American addicts who have come down to either addicted to opiates, which is very common, unfortunately, or heroin, fentanyl. And a lot of people now are getting addicted to kratom. So kratom is a natural leaf from Asia that's been touted as a natural opiate, for pain and sleep. People are saying it's without risk, and that's just not true. It does have opiate-like qualities, so you can become very addicted to that. So we're seeing a lot of people with kratom addiction being treated. So for addiction, it's the gold standard. If you or anyone you know is addicted to a substance, I would highly recommend looking into Ibogaine treatment. But aside from addiction, it's showing great promise for PTSD. There's a lot of veterans from the US coming down to treat for their PTSD, and very successfully. There's some great documentaries out there you can check out for that. Now we're starting to get into some more neurodegenerative type conditions like Parkinson's and MS, and it's showing great promise there as well because of what it does to the brain chemistry. So I think we're just scratching the surface on what this can treat as far as Western type diseases. But for addiction, again, it is the gold standard in my opinion.
There's this concept that you can reset the journey in some ways that is very different than another type of psychedelic or entheogen, where once you're on, there's no stopping it, so to speak, right? You're in the journey, you're in the throes of it. With Ibogaine, I think it's very interesting that it has this dreamlike quality where if you are experiencing something a little too difficult for you in that moment, you can reset it. Can you talk a little bit about how that's different?
Yeah, so that's another difference of this medicine. It's considered an oneirogenic, and oneirogenic means dream inducing or inducing a dreamlike state. So it puts you into this lucid dream. And I say lucid because you're in control. You know where you are at all times, but it can be very visual and very real. But if it gets too intense, like you mentioned, the key is just to usually have an eye mask on while you're doing this. If you get very intense or anxious, just take off your eye mask and look around, and you become grounded again, and that particular visual stops. Then when you're ready to re-engage with your journey, put your eye mask back on, really listen to the music. The music is a very integral part of not only this journey, but I think any journey with psychedelics, but especially with Ibogaine. You just re-engage with the music and it takes you right back into your journey. Now, if the thing you were anxious about is important, you're going to revisit that later. It's not going to let it go. It'll just come back later. Now, if it was kind of trivial, it may be gone forever. But yeah, that's one thing that's very different about most psychedelics is you're kind of in control of this journey. So if things get too tough, just open your eyes. And then when you're ready to re-engage again, just again, listen to the music and almost immediately you get re-engaged with the journey.
And other than in, of course, Africa, where this comes from, in the West, you are basically in a clinical setting. So that's also quite different. I mean, some people who might do it less responsibly may not, but the gold standard for this procedure is to have cardiology workup, to have all kinds of different markers that show that you're okay to do this. And then you go into a clinical setting, a bed, that's being monitored by a nurse, a doctor, all of this. So tell us a little bit about, this is definitely not jungle medicine in the traditional sense where you can go in an overnight ceremony, under the stars. Tell us a little bit about how this is more of a contained medical procedure.
Well, you said it's the gold standard. It should be the gold standard if you care about safety, in my opinion. Because again, this has some serious cardiac consequences. So if you want to be the safest you can be, I would definitely go somewhere who does screen you with an EKG, does blood work, and then has someone on site while you're doing it. Now, it doesn't have to be in a hospital bed. You can have an EKG laying on a cot or in a hammock, but as long as someone is watching your rhythm, so if something does start getting off, they can intervene. So it seems to be one of two extremes right now. Either you go someplace that's too clinical, it feels like you're in a hospital. I mean, literally, some places have hospital beds. There's a cardiac monitor beeping. You feel like you're in ICU. Now, you're going to be safe, but to me, there needs to be a sweet spot between that and the other extreme, which would be going to Africa and actually getting initiated with some of these Bwiti tribes, where they just sit around a fire or dance around a fire for 2 nights. I mean, it's a long ceremony, and you're eating handfuls of bark, and there's no medical screening. You're in the hands of these healers who've been doing this forever, and you're probably going to be safe. But again, I would at least get a medical screening prior to even doing that. So at a bare minimum, a good medical screening is essential, whether you do the extreme that's more shamanistic or you do the extreme that's more clinical. Either way, I would do a good screening. But that's been my goal since the day one I've been doing this, was to find that sweet spot where you have clinical oversight for safety, but you have ceremony and you honor the ceremonial roots of this medicine. And I think you can do both. So I think that's where things need to go, is to honor both sides of that coin. You want to be safe, but you also want to have some ceremony around this journey.
Very, very beautiful. And I think that, with all these changes, hopefully this can be more readily available for the people who really need it. Like you said, in addictions, we really don't have a whole lot of, really good options that have a good outcomes in the States right now. And so hopefully this is something that done well can be really helpful to a lot of people.
I'm excited about the buzz now around psychedelics in the US, but I want people to realize that this is going to be a long road. The executive order that Trump announced, that's only to get started on researching this. So that's going to take years to get to where there's a place where you can actually go to treat with Ibogaine. So I wouldn't look for that to happen in the US anytime soon. And I think right now the best option to do Ibogaine would be to go to Mexico, where I am. There's a lot of safe, medically supervised clinics down here, and Down here, it's kind of unregulated. It's not, they're not saying it's legal down here, but it's not illegal. They haven't addressed it. So it's a gray area, which is safe legally. So there's a lot of clinics down here. They're doing things very well. So for people who are really set on doing this medicine, I would look to Mexico first. There's also a lot of places in Costa Rica. There's some places in Europe. But if you're wanting to do it in the US, it's going to have to be underground. Now, that's not to say you can't do underground plant medicine safely, but you've got to do a lot of vetting of the place you go to, again, to make sure they're doing proper medical screening. But there's a lot of people doing underground psychedelic work, as you know, ayahuasca, ibogaine, psilocybin is getting very popular now. And psilocybin is actually being done legally now in some states, Oregon, and so there's some Western states that have actually, Colorado, that have actually legalized the therapeutic use of psilocybin. So that's one that's leading the charge in the US, is psilocybin. But actually, the law that was passed in Colorado a few years ago included Ibogaine. I don't think people realize that. Now, they concentrated on psilocybin first, but now that they have those protocols set and they've got people trained, I think the emphasis now is switching to Ibogaine. So you're going to start hearing more and more about Ibogaine, and it may be the next one to pop up as far as actual places to go to do this. But again, it's going to be these are in your backyard.
And obviously, one other piece we do need to mention is that Ibogaine is quite pricey, regardless of how you look at it compared to other journeys you might be able to do with other plant medicines. Ibogaine is significantly higher. The cost. It's a week long, if not more.
I think that's a result of the medical oversight. It's expensive to hire physicians and nurses. Yeah. Whereas a lot of people can go to a psilocybin retreat in the jungle and there's one shaman there and you're sleeping in a hut. That's going to be much less expensive, obviously. So I think it's worthwhile to spend the extra money for Ibogaine, but you're right. That's another differentiator. As Ibogaine, a journey with Ibogaine is going to be more expensive than most psychedelics. That's true.
Yeah, we're talking well over, I don't know, the prices obviously range based on the clinic and the time spent and all of that, but you could spend upwards of $10,000 on something like this.
I mean, some have very basic amenities, some are a VIP experience. So I do think there is a place in anyone's budget, but again, you have to do your homework and vet these places. And that's part of what I do with my consulting. It's if people are interested, first of all, I would suggest they read the book. It's a very short 50-page ebook, but it goes over each of the 6 common psychedelics and get an overview of each one and see if you resonate with one of them. And if you do and you want to move forward, then I can have a consultation with you and we can go into more detail and I can actually screen you medically since I do have a medical background. So I think I'm I'm somewhat unique in this field, and then I've spent over 20 years in Western medicine. So I've got that part covered. And now I've spent, 6-8 years on the psychedelic side. So I've got both sides of those issues covered. So I think I can be a great resource for people who need some help navigating this decision and this journey.
Absolutely. And we will have a link to Scott's ebook and where you can get a hold of Scott if you'd like to schedule something with him to just even look at the different options, whether or not you're a candidate, especially for something like an Ibogaine experience. Just very shortly, my husband was trying to go through an Ibogaine experience, and in that screening process, he found out he had some heart issues. So had he not had that screening, which is why we're really stressing how important it is, it may have been catastrophic for him to go through just blindly something like this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. So this is really close to home for you. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I would strongly encourage, meeting with an expert like Scott, who can really point you in the right direction, even if you need to know where do you go in the States to get an EKG or do something like that. He can help navigate some of that. And then his ebook goes over a lot of these options. Again, depending on your case, there has to be maybe a cost risk analysis, benefits, which which one is the best for you. And we've seen some really difficult cases at the clinics where it was life or death with regards to addiction. So in that case, you know, that definitely trumped any other maybe smaller medical issues because the addiction was so severe. So it really depends case by case.
Sure. And every physiology is unique. Every person's situation is unique. And that's one of the big issues I've got with Western medicine. And there is no personalization of medicine. So every person with disease A gets drug B, say milligrams, no matter if you're male, female, what your physiology is like. I mean, we're all very unique, but there's no customization to the treatment in Western medicine. That's one of many problems of Western medicine, but that's a big one for me. So yeah, each person's situation is going to have a unique risk to benefit analysis associated with it.
Absolutely.
And by the way, for people, in case you're wondering, it's called SHIFT, SHIFT. I've always loved that word since I've been in this psychedelic space. And a shift to me is a little adjustment that has a huge consequence. So the metaphor I like to use is if you're an airline pilot and you make a little 1 degree shift in your direction. Now, if you look at the cockpit panel, nothing changes. You can't detect that little shift. But if you look 1,000 miles down the road, you're going to be in another country. So a huge consequence from a little input. And that's what these medicines do. They can shift your perspective. They can shift your consciousness. They can shift your physiology. So I love the word shift. So that's the reason I named the book Shift, in case people are interested.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Scott, for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge. And we look forward to, you know, talking to you again. There's going to be the link down below if you are interested in getting a hold of Scott or reading his book. And again, thank you so much for sharing your information with us today.
Welcome. And thank you for all the work you're doing.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care.